2,000 years ago, humans wondered what made them different from the rest of the animals in the world. They had no science back then because science hadn't been invented. But they did have two things. One, a few scholarly, inquisitive minds, and two, religious and cultural beliefs. So back then, you might say that human nature was a blank slate that philosophers and religious scholars argued over. Nothing was contributed from psychology because it too hadn't been invented. But that all changed by the second half of the 19th century. In the time between 1860 and 1900, a few scientific researchers searched the world for evidence of a single unifying factor that would account for all human nature. Eventually, they gave up because the observable world's evidence didn't support their belief, but the belief remained. Around 1900, doctors treating ill patients cited case study evidence that they believed pointed to a mental illness. Based on their observations, they built methods for treating certain mental disorders and brought another factor into the picture. By about 1940, biologists had isolated a powerful force in human nature that also played an important role in animal behavior, a third force. Finally, in the 1950s, psychology found its voice and focused on a class of disorders that also played a significant role in human nature. So now we have four factors. Let's add some letters to keep track of which factor is which. G is the general factor from early scientists. M is the medical factor from the medical community. B is the biology factor from the world of animal behavior. And that is a psi for psychology. That is the force brought in by the field of psychology. Now, with just this picture, you can ask yourself this question. Does it take four forces to account for all human nature? Can four forces possibly account for all of human nature? And in addition, will those four forces be able to combine to produce any other awesome force of nature, a fifth force, perhaps, of human nature? Let's tackle the second question first. Researchers didn't have the analytic tools needed to answer whether forces could combine, so they left it unanswered, and instead they made convenient visual choices locating each force to suggest a simple square. The four circles now are arranged with no overlap, but in a very nice 2x2 matrix. Each of the four circles can only influence the two others that it touches. So therefore the red isn't directly connected to the green, so doesn't influence the green directly. And vice versa. The yellow circle and the blue circle don't influence each other because they are not directly touching or connected. And then there's this awkward space in the middle that's empty. What's up with that? Well, the awkwardness was fixed by changing the circles to squares and arranging the squares again into that nice, neat 2x2 matrix. The results reflect an image of the law of visual simplicity. All forms in one easily recognizable identity. The main thing, the slate of human nature is still blank in one regard. These pictures that were drawn don't suggest any combinations or correlations among the independent factors. Now you can change the nature of the pictures by turning them from squares into rectangles, stacking them one on top of the other, and you can even put a triangle over the whole thing so that the suggestion is that something builds to the peak. They still miss the same point. They aren't telling us anything about the correlations and combinations of these four factors into something bigger. So let's go back to our four circles. Let's have them nice and separate. What if we brought them together differently? What if we started with bringing them closer together? Everything looks like it's going along just fine. And then, what in the world? Why did medicine veer over into psychology and overlap it? What's going on there? One interpretation that's common is to say that medicine and psychology combined with each other, hence the shaded overlap, to produce something that couldn't come from either one separately. Meanwhile, the general factor and the biological factor seem to be off by themselves. We ought to fix that. Let's switch our circles to four circles, different colors, and different overlap. You can see the four areas of overlap clearly. Let's take a look at how that happened. They're independent, and over time, science and research figures out that they belong together because combinations of them produce special effects. But notice that in this picture, only two circles opposite each other are left out of the overlap. They do not directly overlap. And the two circles top to bottom also don't overlap directly. So that needs to be possibly changed. But let's make this clear. The present circles have four interacting factors. It may take more if the evidence tells us that more factors or interactions are needed. Well, remember, we started with a blank slate, and we had pretty much no understanding of human nature from an empirical or scientific perspective. Today's psychology helps us to maintain at least four overlapping circles and do a reasonable job with those circles to represent human nature. I'm going to change that overlap a bit and show you a slightly different picture of the same four circles. Less overlap, but identifying the main forces as cognition or thinking, emotions or personality, behaviors speak for themselves, and a fourth dimension that works just beneath the surface, which we used to call the subliminal factor. Those might be good enough to account for quite a bit of human nature as psychologists know it. But there is still a missing fifth or possible additional factor. What if the overlap represented on the right is the more truthful and accurate rendition of how factors work together in human nature? There is a place where all four of the factors, how you think, how you feel, how you behave, and what's going on subconsciously, there's a place where all of that may interact to produce a grand, super powerful fifth factor for which a name is open to suggestion. The fifth dimension. That's already been taken by a seeing group. So we may have 5 factors to answer the question that I posed earlier. You can get 5 factors if you have 4 strong ones that interact to tell you a lot about human nature and produce a 5th factor that will tell you even more interesting things about how humans are. Thank you for watching and stay tuned for more.